Thank you, Amelia. And OCO, everyone. I'm Sam Fletcher. I'm the Executive Director of the New York State chapter of NASW, and I am most importantly Cherokee, and it is very much my pleasure to be hosting and facilitating this chapter chat. And if you are Native, and I saw a few people identify in the chat, please feel free to put your tribe next to your name so we know all of our people and where they're coming from tonight, and we can welcome you here. And I'm going to go ahead and just get us started by asking our panelists to introduce themselves, and I will start with Melody.
No Melody on Matiwa, no Hopiat Nakai Dane, Tucson Epkita. Good afternoon. It's afternoon in Tucson, Arizona. And I am Hopi Navajo Pueblo and Mexican. Got my MSW from UC Berkeley a few decades ago. And as I said, I'm zooming in here from the Dana Atam Jewett, the traditional lands of the Atam people, and the contemporary tribal lands of Pascoyaki. When I say that, I'm not just gratuitously giving you information, I'm letting you know that at all times I work with respect and relationship, with reciprocity, and with responsibility to the people of this land as well. Thanks, Kelly, or thanks, Sam.
You're welcome, Melody. And Kelly, I think Melody already called on you to go next.
Thank you so much for joining tonight. Kelly Ray Vayo Yenshia. Twitch in Jonah Aid Neighbors Chin, Dash Chini Dash Che Kohni Dene Dash Nale. Hello, everybody. My name is Kelly Vayu. Thank you so much for coming today. I am actually broadcasting out of Henderson, Nevada, and I wanted to give land acknowledgement to the Paiute tribe here for welcoming me to their land. So I'm in the Bitterwater clan, born for the Sun People clan. My maternal clan is the start of the Red Streak people, and my paternal clan is the Acoma Pueblo. I am originally from the Navajo Nation and a member of the Navajo Nation. However, I do work and live currently in Phoenix, Arizona.
Thank you, Kelly. Stephen Whitehorn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. I just want to say welcome to everybody that joined the webinar. I hope that we are able to provide you with information and give you some background about what is going on in Indian country and what maybe might be the future of Indian country, and talk a little bit more about what are the needs in Indian country. But I'm a graduate from Western Carolina University in Western North Carolina. I worked with the Eastern Band of Cherokees while I was there. Currently, I'm in Rockville, Maryland, and I work for the federal government for SAMHSA. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And our final panelist, Kwana Yellow Cloud, could you introduce yourself?
Hi everybody. I'm Betukile Janteo Ashte na Bechu Zapielo. Jintkala Ska Emachi Api na Washiju Ea Kwana Yellow Cloud Hemacha. Maji Ahaha Oyanke Emaka. New York Ilwatie Yellow. Hi everybody. My Lakota name is Whitebird and my English name is Kwana Yellow Cloud, and I live in New York. I'm an enrolled member of the Oglala Lakota Nation, and I was born and raised on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. I currently live and work in New York on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee people, and I'm also a current MSW graduate student as well.
Thank you so much, panelists. I'm going to start with our first question. Why is it important for Native social workers to collaborate with each other to uplift all of our nations? And whoever the ancestors move can go first.
I thought ladies first.
Okay, I know Kelly's looking at me. Just in general, I believe that Indigenous peoples need to collaborate with each other for just the well-being of not just our nations, but of the planet herself. And I think that collaboration has never been more key than it currently is. As far as social workers, it's a beautiful thing. As I said, I graduated a few decades ago from UC Berkeley as one of 3 Native people in the social work program, which we thought was amazing. We thought having 3 of us was absolutely like fantastic, that it wasn't just one person. And so now seeing all these names here and all these tribes, we have it now. We have our theories down. We have our methodologies. We have our traditional ways have come back since the 20s. So that traditional knowledge and the contemporary social work knowledge, it's time to bring them together for the health of our people. And we do need to collaborate. Yes, we need to work with our tribes or urban Indian communities, but we also need to support each other because the work is tough. The work can eat you alive. I'm saying that as an on the grounds boot person. The work I do a lot with the Honor Collective, Healing Our Nations, Offering Resilience. What we do is we support individuals, families, and communities touched by issues around murdered and missing Indigenous relations. And I have been doing this work for decades. We didn't call it that. We didn't have the name. We didn't have a hashtag or anything like that to go by, but we knew what was happening in communities. And we would get together, social workers, when it was possible at conferences, and we would ask, do you know what happened to? And people. And so this long time epidemic finally has a name to it. And those issues are social work issues. And the way we need to come together to handle this really takes collaboration. And I think really the point is not being in competition, but in sharing. I know what happens here in Tucson, Arizona. Definitely Quanah is not going to be jumping to do in South Dakota. And that's okay, because a kernel of what I'm saying can touch him and his people. And the same thing, when I listen to Stephen, there's going to be information I need to serve my people. We need to come together and have space to talk about what's happening, because it's good out here. Look at all the people out here. It's beautiful. We have the knowledge. It's just time to come together and share.
Thank you for that, Melody. And I do appreciate the question. I, from my personal perspective, wanted to iterate that I do not speak for all tribes. I am only speaking for and I'm not saying Melody did, but I'm just saying, like, from my perspective, as a social worker, I've been in this field for a little over going on 14 years now. And even though I come from a younger generation, I have seen the changes in social work, especially in the field of, what's happening currently in Indian country. And I feel like it is important for one of us to collaborate with one another in regards to going back towards that Indigenous thinking framework. We once had a collaborative of unity. We once had a collaborative of learning off one another. Now, I know a lot of, people who aren't so familiar with, Indigenous culture and history. Yes, we did have natural enemies within tribes. However, we were not, we were able to continue to learn off each other, to learn about one another's culture. And I think currently right now, with the way advocacy is going, with how our youth are leading that advocacy and how they're really able to bring back a lot of that, Indigenous thinking and Indigenous frameworks, I think it's good that we continue to utilize that unity to work off, not to work off, but to collaborate with one another so we can unite and bring back the way we were when it came to kinship, relationship, when it came to building communities, when it came to communication, when it came down to storytelling of the history of the lessons. And I think that is one of the greatest ceremonies that we have, that we all share as Indian country, is that we all have the universal storytelling in regards to how we learn, how we're able to teach one another. And personally, I feel like that's what I've been doing in regards to the job that I've chosen to take as a social worker. And so a lot of people say, I didn't choose the job chose me. And I think naturally, being that we are all Indigenous, we are all naturally, whether this is your field or not, we are all naturally helpful people. And so I feel like it's a great calling for all of us. And I do agree with Melody. Look how much we've grown as a community, in Indigenous community as well. And just knowing that we have the support of one another only makes us that much stronger.
I love everything you both have said. I'm going to repeat the question for Stephen and Kwana. Why is it important for Native social workers to collaborate with each other to lift up all our nations?
Kwana, go ahead.
So so I'm just going to speak from my own personal experience and from my family's experience and from what my dad has taught me over the years. And so I originally got into the social work field out of the due to the theories that are in place within social work, due to the holistic nature of the profession in and of itself. Because originally I had wanted to go into nursing school, and my goal was originally to work with the Indian Health Service as a nurse practitioner. But just looking at my own background, looking at the way that my dad raised me, looking at my family, we're all very traditional, and I thought that nursing didn't really, I guess, capture those ideas. It didn't really fit into the way that I was raised, whereas with social work, it resonated more with me into the way that I was raised, with our traditions, ceremonies, songs. And even just over the years, I'm in my second year of my social work program. And I've found that there's a really big, there's a lot of Indigenous social workers out there, more so in the research area. I've been able to make connections with some other Indigenous researchers. And I think social work, as Indigenous people, we are, I guess I would say we're in kind of like a strange position just due to our training, due to the way that we're taught in our MSW or BSW programs. We're taught to be more holistic, which is something that I find lacking in other areas. And I think that translates well into the way that, at least the way that I was taught within my family, some of our traditions.
And Stephen, that leaves you.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to all the panelists for all your good words that you shared with us. And I want to say thank you to everybody that joined us again and those that have just joined us. I would like to say that the reason I asked for the ladies to go first is because traditionally in our tribe and many Native tribes, the matriarchs are the leaders. They are the ones that help guide the tribe and provide the knowledge. There are libraries, there are champions. They held a great place of honor and respect, and I always wanted to carry that on because as Native people, we walk in two worlds. We walk in the native world and we walk in the non-native world. We work in the non-native world, a lot of us, but we live in the native world. And some of us are have the luxury to live a really rich life. And I want to commend you, Kwana, for taking on that decision, because it's not easy to do, to live where you live and do what you do and to see what you see day in and day out, and to fight the good fight the best you can with what you have and what you know. And that's the way we've always done it. It's true, when we were attacked and targeted for genocide, as a federal government held against us, we had to band together due to disease, due to loss of population. We all had to band together. My tribe, closely related, the Oto-Missouri tribe, is very closely related to the Winnebago and the Ho-Chunk. Many tribes had to come together. The Mandans had to come together with the Hidatsis. So you'll find that throughout Indian countries where many tribes had to band together. And so when you think about how us as social workers banding together to support tribes is so very important. Now, I will tell a story that I'm a little bit older, maybe than most of you on the panel, but I went to a Native American boarding school. My great motivation was that, I went to a Seneca Indian school, I went to Shalako Indian school, and both those schools are now closed. And I will tell you that there weren't any Indian social workers there. There weren't. Not in those days. Was there brutality? Yes. I'm not going to go into it. I don't want anybody to get triggered. Was there sexual abuse at these boarding schools? Yes, there was. So there was a physical, emotional, social ostracization. All these things were happening when I was in boarding school. And I would see young children, very, very young children that were in these boarding schools. Now they should have never been put there. They should have never been warehoused there. But that's where we ended up. And the reason I say that is that we really need to understand our history of what's happened to us. Now, the United States government has never talked about crimes against humanity when it comes to American Indians. But when you look at what has happened to us historically, you will see that on every scale in this country and around the world, that what happened to American Indians were crimes against humanity. And many of those crimes have never been answered, have never been addressed. And it's not hard. It's not hard to do that, but it's not something that's coming to the surface. These are the things that continue to be a part of American Indians' life, because while it may be easy for some people to forget about what happened to the American Indian, upon contact, we gave what we could to help those that came here. And then when we couldn't give any more, they took what they wanted. And that's what happened to us. And as social workers, American Indian social workers, we need to band together and support one another and support other tribes that need our help. Because so many of them, when I worked for Indian Health Services, I was deployed to many nations because of suicide crisis, because of shortage of counselors, because of shortage of social workers, facing things like substance abuse, missing and murdered Indigenous women, veterans committing suicide, suicide epidemic or pandemics, epidemics. People, it was just, there's a crisis in Indian country, and we don't talk about it. Now, of course, there's many things to celebrate, and I'm not going to deny that. There are many things that we should be celebrating. But a lot of things has come to knowledge, to our knowledge now, through science. We now, through Maria Braveheart, Yellow Horse Braveheart, talking about historical trauma, understanding epigenetics and how that's passed down generational trauma through every one of us. So there's so many things that we could choose to champion and still never get to the bottom of the list. We haven't even begun to talk about health disparity. We haven't even begun to touch the surface of equity. We haven't even begun to touch the surface of all the social determinants of health for American Indians and Alaskan Natives. There's a lot that we need to do. There's a lot that we need to address. And there's a lot we need to come together on and band together and support one another and do the best we can with what we have and what we know. So I'll leave it there for now and turn it back to you, Sam.
Stephen, when I met you this summer, when you shared your story, it pierced my spirit, and it continues to pierce my spirit. And I hope that it's piercing everyone's spirit, because you just dropped a lot of truth, as did Melody, Kelly, and Kwana. And I want to thank you for your vulnerability in doing that. And I know we've talked a little bit, and I also want to thank you for explaining the order that we talk in, because if you notice, when we start with the introductions, I started with Melody because we're matrilineal, and Melody is the elder female on the panel. So we start with her, then Kelly, then you as the elder male on the panel. So I thank you for explaining that to people, that that's a natural way for us to talk and to share. Now, we've talked a little bit about this, but I want to ask you more specifically what drew you as a Native person to the field of social work, and to talk a little bit more about your work in the community and what you're doing, because I know you're all doing really important work in the community. Melody, of course, I think naturally it goes to you.
Thank you, Sam. So, just being really honest, when I was an undergrad in psychology, I looked into grad school and I looked at both a psychology program and a social work program. And I honestly looked at who gave me the most money to attend school. So I was about the scholarships and about those opportunities. And I will say that when I was going to graduate school, California had just overturned affirmative action. So I wasn't looking at that kind of money. I also was not funded by tribal money. I was just looking at where could I garner scholarships for my GPA and all my work. And what won was UC Berkeley, which also had an Indian child welfare emphasis in their child welfare program. And I think that really put me over the edge, because the two schools, I'm not going to name the competitor, I'm going to name the winner. The other one, I didn't see that Indian child welfare, that's it. I need to go somewhere that's going to support me as an Indigenous person seeking to do what I want to do for my community. But much like Kelly said, I was born a social worker. When I had my first interview for a job, they asked how long I'd been doing social work. So, about 30 years, including time with my family. And, joking, not joking. And always looking at those systems. The thing about social work, and the reason I considered psychology, is the role of social work in tribal communities was something difficult for me to say, I am going to take this on. A lot of child removal, there's been a history. Since the United States was created, before the United States was created, there's a huge history of removing Indigenous children. And it's not just the US, all over, this was a policy about removing children from families, but social workers, we played a really big part in that. And so I have to absorb and understand that history in social work. So even though I was drawn to the concept of examining systems, I've always been at odds with the concept of what is social work and what does it mean. One of my Native professors, he was funny. And he would say, so how many children have you saved today? And he was being totally sarcastic. And it's just kind of like, we're not saviors, we're community supporting ourselves. And so I'm not seeking to save anyone. And that, but again, that mentality, and it's still out there. It's still out there. Where Indian Child Welfare Act is coming to Supreme Court, amicus brief have been created. That's when I came into social work. It was all about Indian child welfare. I came into social work after ICWA was a law. And I just felt so fabulously empowered to be able to work with the dynamic people that helped create that law. So that's some of what drew me into social work. Was I was willing to take on the burdens of what social work has done to my people in order to be part of this, at that time, resurgence and something new happening. So that's what drew me to social work. But it says, how have I leveraged my professional self? And you know what? It has been all about the leverage. I am all about that. I love being an MSW. I fearlessly walk into community, social worker, yeah, baby, I love it. And because I'm bringing in, yeah, right. I say I bring in Indigenous social work sovereignty. I feel like I now have come to a place where I'm able to assert our Indigenous ways of understanding the world into my social work practice. So I don't feel like I am imposing, no offense, NASW standards. I go way beyond that. The ethics I hold are much higher. The way I speak with the community, the way I talk to clients is completely different because I hold my standard very differently. And that's a standard of kinship. Now, you may have noticed, like, there's a really long, I'm several tribal affiliations, and I'm going to say being multi-tribal like that, I have a lot of kinship. I have a lot of peoples that I need to respect. The land I'm on, there's a lot of respect for those people. So I'm constantly in this place of kinship and establishing kinship and reigniting kinship in some cases. And I really do look at it that way. You know, it's very important. So that's how I leverage my professional self, is always taking those Indigenous ways of being into the communities and of who I serve. So I think that's good. I can talk for like an hour on this, but I'm going to go ahead and pass to Kelly.
How do I follow up with that? You know, no. Well, the reason why I chose, the social work field, is it, again, along with Melody, it had come naturally to me. My grandmother has always been that member of the community that helped everybody. My grandfather would, and then I'm sorry about the background noise, I'm like in a hotel conference. So and my grandfather was a healer in the community. So the obligation of us helping people, there was no question about it. Whether we were like, I don't want to, we were chased to do it. So it became a natural part of the way I was brought up, my family, my culture, my tradition. Even within my family unit, it became a tradition that's kind of what we do. We help people. I've never been a social worker of academia. I did go to Arizona State University. I'm naming that school because, yeah. And so it was a real, so for me, my experience in getting education or receiving my education in social work, boarding school, there was just like so much of confliction and confusion on my end. And I always get emotional about this, but during the boarding school era, a lot of our families and a lot of Indigenous children were taken away. They were forced removal and they were put into boarding school and they were forced to assimilate. And I think that's kind of where my confliction and confusion came in, is because going to school was really, really forced upon me by my grandparents and my mom, that it was very important that I had to go to school. And it was hard for me to accept that, because why would I want to go to school when it hurt my people? Like, why would I want to do that? And I always had that resistance. I always argued with my parents about it. I argued with my grandparents until finally my grandfather sat me down. And he's gone right now, so that's why it's like so emotional to me. Was he sat me down and he said, the reason why you need to go to school is so that that doesn't happen again, that you're able to learn these laws and that you're able to learn the social challenges that our people continue to face. And so that's kind of what I took. And so my grassroots skills, experience in working in communities started at a very young age, which is why I say I'm not so much of an academic social worker. It's easy to learn theories and it's easy to learn frameworks and it's easy to apply that in whatever. I mean, I can just BS my way right now and say, these are the theories and the frameworks, you know. But those theories and frameworks have not really been implemented and applied into tribal communities. They're talked about. And I think that's why I chose not to be so social work academic. A lot of my experience in social work has come from grassroots experience. I know there's a lot of, and my choosing to do this field was more towards systems and how the systems need to change. I mean, I can go all day about, you know, policies and laws, but I think right now, and that takes time to change. But I think within these organizations and agencies that are providing that type of support, those systems need to change. And with my grassroots experience, I'm able to provide that perspective and say, this doesn't work and this is not helping. And I've got experience in a whole plethora of social injustices and challenges when it comes to tribal communities. And I think when, you know, as I progressed on as a social worker and understanding the social injustices and challenges that are really affecting our tribal communities, especially within my own tribal community, I became that voice for those that aren't able to understand those medical jargons or able to understand those legal jargons. And that's one thing that really irritated me, especially within Indian country. We have our Indigenous professionals who've made it up and who've leveled to that, you know, professional career. And they've become assimilated and colonized into the system that they do that lateral violence, if you will, back towards on our people about, you should just do this or you should just do that, and all you just need to do. And for me is like, if it was a just, we wouldn't be here in regards to like the social challenges that we're having. So when it came to me choosing this field, I chose to be that voice, you know. And one of the things that I feel like has become a great barrier is we're losing some of our language. We're losing some of that culture. And the more we lose that culture and that language, the more we lose that connectedness. And that's kind of where I stepped in, and I can speak fluent in my language. So I'm able to explain these services. I'm able to explain these medical, you know, procedures or instructions or whatnot for those that speak my language, especially the elders. And right now within my work, I've kind of moved towards more of a macro field, because I've done a lot of one-on-one. And I've worked with agencies that work with ICWA. I've worked with the judicial system. I've worked with the youth or children who are victims of sexual assault and those who are predators themselves. I've worked, you know, in such an array, and I, mind you, I've worked in these fields not because of my education. because of my experience. And so, though I have a master's degree attached to my name, it wasn't that education that got me that opportunity or got me that experience. It was me utilizing that grassroots, the way Melody had explained about how I'm able to talk to my community, how I'm able to talk to, you know, different Indigenous families, even families in general. And I don't like to dress professional in my field because that just shows a hierarchy. And these families have enough hierarchy of where they're seeing a judge who's dressed professional. They're seeing a lawyer who's already dressed professional. They're seeing all these professional. I'd come in my jeans and t-shirt and be like, dude, I get it, you know, and I'm here to help you navigate through this, to help you understand. And I think that's where that connectedness is missing. And that's where this, you know, the panel about kinship really comes into play. And I do agree with Melody in regards to the code of ethics for social workers. I necessarily do not feel that that really applies to what we do in our profession when we're working with Indigenous communities, because we are all about relationships. And I feel that, you know, with me being able to be that voice and explaining that, you know, this relationship is important, this is why and how we identify ourselves. It's about belonging. It's about mastering that belonging. You know, it's about interdependence of that belonging. And it's also about being able to give that back. And so, and that applies to what it is that we do. I'm a part of another organization called Honor Collective, and I'm a matriarch with that organization. So I provide healing into that community. Now, mind you, I'm not a spiritual healer in that sense, but one thing that we clarified is that we are helpers to the healers. And in that sense is that we provide that healing to the community. And so when I was talking about belonging and mastering, interdependence and giving, we're correlating that with respect, reciprocity, relationship, and also responsibility. And in this sense, as a social worker, as a community member, and as a matriarch, it is my responsibility to continue to give that healing, to give that matriarchy, nurturing, if you will. If we want to use a westernized concept, we will say nurturing to the community. But more or less, it really does take a village, you know, to raise a child. It really does take a village to look out for one another. And I feel like with me choosing that field as a social worker, that's what I decided to do. And that's why I naturally am flowing. I really am flowing into this field. And I'm not going to say, it's not like I'm saying, oh, this is what I'm doing. This is like, I really believe that when things come to me, it was there was a reason for it. And so far, my experience, my expertise, my skills, and I do say expertise in a sense that my expertise has led me to continue my grassroots healing and my grassroots work because I am the expertise of the people, meaning that I know the language, I know the skills, and I know how to apply that to make sure that I'm bringing that advocacy and that voice back into the tribal communities. Thank you.
Kelly, yes, thank you, Melody. That I just want to, I want to direct your attention to the chat. We have some Native social workers, our good friend Eddie Bravo and Lex Gomez. You're really speaking to the Native social workers today. You're speaking to me because I really struggled in school with social work with boundaries. When they would talk about boundaries and describe things, I'd be like, this isn't how my people interact with each other. Like, this isn't how we talk to each other, and how it looks different. And like, I felt like it was very European in the way that it was taught, and not understanding tribal communities and how we interact with each other and how we heal with each other. So I think you nailed that tonight. So I thank you for giving the words to us for that tonight. And Stephen and Kwana, so what brought you to social work? What drew you to social work? And talking a little bit more about the work you're doing with your communities. And Kwana, I know you're a student, but I know you're also still doing work. So
I can go first, Kwana. Thank you, ladies. You really got everybody fired up and thinking in a really good way about social work and how it relates to our tribal people. You know, our tribal people were social workers thousands of years before Europeans even came here. But I do want to say this. I'm not here tonight to bash anybody, but I will talk about facts. And sometimes the facts are hard to hear. One of those facts, of course, is what was mentioned was about ICWA. And ICWA didn't become a law. The Indian Child Welfare Act didn't become a law until 1977. A lot of people may not know that. But I will talk a little bit about what drew me into social work. People of color in this country weren't allowed to go to school. They weren't allowed to go to higher education. They weren't allowed to graduate from universities. I mean, they just weren't. Now, if you wanted to be, you know, like my father, if he wanted to take up a trade, you know, that was okay. But to go to a college and graduate from college or a master's degree or a doctorate degree, that was just far few between and never heard of. And that didn't happen until right around the 60s. And I could almost tell you, because I can remember my aunts going to school when they first got the ability to do that. Tribal colleges, tribal communities, tribal community colleges, they didn't come about until way, way later. A lot of our people lived kind of in the dark ages of education, of higher education back in my time. So we weren't really allowed to really go into college, and we weren't really comfortable with going there anyway, because there weren't people there like us. But many of us did brave that. But I will tell you that we were good enough to go into the Army. And my dad was a veteran of the Korean Army. My grandfather was a veteran of World War II. You know, and so there was just things that were going on that didn't really support tribal people then. But what drew me into social work was this. Of course, I talked a little bit about going into a boarding school and seeing everything that was going on with Native children. And I knew right then that what was happening in the boarding school, even before they got to the boarding school, these children were wounded. They were wounded warriors. They were wounded by the things that had happened to them. They were wounded by being there. They were wounded by being kept there. They were wounded by many, many things, by the people that were there, that were supposed to be taking care of them. And so I learned early on that children's spirits, that social workers, we should be protectors of children's spirits. All children, all Native American children, and all children. That is what we should be doing. That's what we've always done. But, you know, because of what had happened to us, that was shattered. That was totally shattered. I ask people all the time, I said, you ever wonder why you don't speak your native language? And they said, no. Well, they took it away from us. I said, yeah, that was what happened, but that wasn't the reason why it happened. The reason why it happened was so you could be controlled. That was the main reason. And I went to Alaska, and we were talking about losing our language. Kelly was saying a little bit about that, and there was a traditional Inuit woman talking before a council of elders, and she was crying, and she said to the council that the children want to learn the language, but the elders aren't teaching us. And she said, if you don't start teaching us, we're going to stop asking. And that really struck me in a very meaningful way, in understanding that what happened to American Indians. Because what happened was in my father's time and my grandfather's time, you were punished if you spoke your language. You were beaten. You were beaten in ways that are just unmentionable. Again, I will say crimes against humanity. And my parents and my grandfather, they didn't want that for us. So that's why they withheld. That's why they withheld teaching us the language, because they didn't want to see us shamed. They didn't want to see us humiliated. They didn't want to see us disadvantaged. They didn't want to see us abused. So they didn't teach us the language. They wanted us to have a job. If you knew your language, you weren't going to get a job. They would tell you to go back to the reservation. So there's a lot to say about language and how important it is to our tribe, but yet understand why we speak English. So going back to, the early days, I began working for Casey Family Program, and some of you may know who that is. And I was a transporter for children that went to see psychiatrists, children that were abused, And I always thought, I don't really see these kids getting any better. I don't know, they're seeing a psychiatrist, he's doing all the right things, the play therapy, the assessments, the screening, doing all the right things, saying all the right words, but the kids weren't getting any better. And I always wondered why that was. And then I went and I worked at a Native American residential school for a while. And here's, all these young American Indian men and women, coming in there with all kinds of problems, all kinds of issues, trauma, PTSD, anxiety disorder, depression, cutting, substance abuse, opioids, all the things that we are overrepresented in. We're overrepresented in the prisons. We're overrepresented in child abuse. We're overrepresented in substance abuse. We're overrepresented in diabetes. We're overrepresented in this and in that. And then the list goes on and on and on. And, Google it. You'll see health disparities. We're leading suicide. We're leading, and so that's what drew me into social work, because I kept seeing, and when I became a counselor, I went into early child because that's what I want. I'm an early child scholar. I'm an early child collaborative scholar. And I won the Tony Brown Award for the state of North Carolina. And I focused my clinical work on early child interventions. And I got trained in CPP, child parent psychotherapy, and PCIT, parent interaction therapy. So I learned these things. I learned CBT, TFCBT, all the alphabets for treatment modalities for working with American Indians and Alaska Native children. It was a non-stop evolving door. It never stopped. It kept coming and coming and coming. And then you try all these modalities, you try all these interventions, and nobody was talking about traditional healing. Nobody was talking about using our ways, our language, our knowledge. They were talking about, oh, if you want to get paid, better use CBT. I can bill you. I can bill for CBT, TFCBT. Yeah, I can do all that. But what about tribal stuff? No, can't do it. CMS says no. So again, I'm not bashing, but I'm talking the truth here. So there are a lot of things that drew me into being a social worker and supporting Native American children. And I thought at working at the federal level that I could try to get upstream of all this, because here's all these children coming down. Where's the prevention? Where's the, social determinants of health interventions? Who's helping the families? Why is it generation after generation are coming up with these same issues, or sometimes it's a crisis? And so I really wanted to understand that and learn that. What are our tribal leaders doing? What's our United States government doing to help Native children, to give them something to hold on to be successful in this life and in this world, and at the same time hold on to their culture? This country of ours, GDP, is trillions of dollars. Trillions. American Indians aren't getting rich off of casinos. I can tell you that. And not every tribe has a casino. But yet, American Indians are held to the government to apply for grants. So there are many things that are happening to tribal people, the stewards of this land, that has yet to be answered, and hopefully will be answered. So I'll stop there and turn it over to you, Kwana.
So thank you everybody for sharing your stories. It's been an honor to listen to all of you speak. So thank you. I know I touched upon this a little bit before, about with nursing school versus social work. But part of the reason why I also chose social work was because so when I was younger, I was actually adopted outside of the tribe. So my adoptive family, they're Washichu, or white, they're a white family, but they were lucky enough, and I was lucky enough to maintain connection within the tribe, within my biological family, so I could learn our traditional ways, learn our ceremonies, learn our songs. And just from the experiences that I had with the social workers that were assigned to me when I was younger, they weren't that great. There was a lot of a lot of mishaps that happened, especially with the courts, especially with the adoption process. But then even just going on working in the areas that I started working in during my undergrad years, my first job was actually working so I started working for a veterans treatment center in Rochester, New York, where I actually, I had a couple of clients who were Mohawk, Seneca, and even just seeing then the way that the courts treated veterans also made me start to wonder, how that fits into my own personal experiences growing up as an Indigenous person, and kind of just looking at the comparisons between the way that, the courts treat Indigenous people and veterans. So for me, my personal interests within the social work area are within academia, and I know, Melody, you told me you mentioned that you aren't much of an academic, that you're very grassroots, and I do appreciate that. I do think that is great. My own interest in academia have mainly been through the way that I was raised with our ceremonies, because when looking at different modalities, the different treatments, and I know we've touched upon that, there isn't a lot of research on that. And I know within the Indigenous community, within our people, the word research can often be a dirty term because it can be used to exploit our own people, our knowledge, our elders. And it's a little difficult because my dad, was a product of the boarding school era. When he was younger, he would often teach people outside of the tribe our ceremonies, our NEP, our sweat ceremonies, even our Sundance ceremonies and songs. And he was exploited for those. And even he's worked with researchers as well to try to bring awareness to our people regarding substance abuse, trauma, depression. And unfortunately, he was never credited for those things that he had taught. And it's not just him, it's our elders, it's everybody. And that is kind of what drew me to the profession, was wanting to kind of bridge that gap between traditional knowledge and our people's knowledge, between our people's traditional knowledge and Western society in health and healthcare. And also what really drew me to the profession too was the CSWE acknowledgement done to the harms to our people. And I thought that really resonated with me because I didn't see that with other professions. I don't see it with medicine. I don't see it with nursing. And I know it will take somebody higher up to really make those changes, but I think that the fact that the CSWE really kind of, I guess, published that and made that acknowledgement really resonated with me into choosing the social work profession. So yeah, it's just a little bit.
Kwana, we're all sending you love, just so you know. And I want to thank you for sharing that. And I was lucky enough that when I went into the school, I got my MSW and PhD, I actually had a tribe mate as a professor. So I had a Cherokee professor. All of you on this panel know how unusual that is, right? And the first thing she said to me when I got in the PhD program is, "You are not doing research with our people, are you?" I was like, "Heck no, I'm not. I know." I understand. Trust me, I understand. And we talked very often about the ways in which she had been exploited in academia. You know, even as a PhD, she was exploited and people stealing her work or putting her name on work so that they could justify their own work. And so, yeah, it's very real. And thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's so important for everyone to hear all of your stories tonight. And please, Stephen, go ahead.
Sam, I just want to respond a little bit to what Kwana said. First of all, thank you, Kwana, for sharing. I really appreciate that. And I believe the audience does too. Everybody's showing you a lot of love. That's important that we be able to do that. And I want to share that love as well. But I do want to talk about two things that you touched on. First of all, people I run into all the time think that they still believe, in the myth that American Indians get everything for free, and that's not true. A lot of people, even one of my professors, my statistics teacher, right? Said, "You get this for free, right?" I said, "No." I said, "That was a treaty that the United States government, one of the treaties that they honored and still provide healthcare for American Indians. Now, I would gladly trade your healthcare plan for my Indian Health Service healthcare plan, and so there's that. And then there's, okay, what about, this terms of research, What I would like to say about that is that NIH, the National Institution of Health, actually has an office that addresses research for American Indians. It's run by David Wilson, Dr. David Wilson. I believe he's Navajo and Hispanic. And David and I know Dave, and we've been in collaborations for a long time, many years now, and he's a good guy and everything. But NIH has all these little research cells all over the place. And they have them on the Indian reservations, they have them all over. So they're doing research all the time. And, I would say that you're probably being researched right now. If you have a cell phone, or if you're on the internet, somebody somewhere is taking down your data and your information. But the point of it is that there's a research group that's being developed, right? Dr. Rubidoux, who used to be the director of Indian Health Services, is kind of helping with that. and they're all Native American researchers, you know, and I went to a couple of their meetings, and the thing that I always kind of wondered about was like, how will Native American researchers fare better than non-Native American researchers, especially if they're not from that tribe? So that's a question that I've always asked myself. And I mean, there's no way I'm going to be an expert on the Navajo Nation, or I'm going to be an expert on the Cheyenne or the Comanches or anybody else. I can be an expert on the Oto Missouri tribe. Did we burn down our boarding school? Yes, twice, and they rebuilt it. But in the end, we prevailed. So that's the thing about there's so many myths out there that Native Americans have to be myth busters for. And that's why it's so important to understand our background, research our background, at least your own tribal background, in terms of your relationship with the federal government and how that it all plays out. And there's something else I want to say about that. The federal government says tribes have sovereignty, but the thing about it is that you have to understand that if somebody says you have sovereignty, that means they can take that sovereignty away if you don't follow the rules and do what they say and do what they want. So that's something to keep in mind. So what is true sovereignty? But anyway, I'll end it there. Back to you, Sam.
Well, I'd like a moment to respond to Kwana as well. So you will see, I am probably one of the biggest Indigenous around. I love reading. I keep little stacks of books. And one of my favorite, I love that Kelly's like nodding, like, yeah, she is such a nerd. And I love really well done research. And that's the thing is, I think there are 100% not enough Indigenous researchers out there. I am a huge proponent of Indigenous data sovereignty. So if anyone out here listening in the 87 people here, Indigenous data sovereignty is an amazing principle to move forward on. And that is one that moves away from people asserting what they want to extract from Indigenous people to Indigenous people and tribes saying what they want to happen for their tribes and what do they need to learn more about in order to successfully provide for their people. So Indigenous data sovereignty is an amazing, amazing movement. I'm very lucky. While I do support Wildcats at Arizona State University, go Devils, I also live here next to the University of Arizona, which has some of the people who began Indigenous data sovereignty out of the Native Nations Institute. It's a global way of thinking. A lot of other countries, Maoris in New Zealand, like live by these principles in a much stronger way than we're integrating here in the United States. First Nations people also are really implementing these different standards of how we work. And so, you know, Kwana, you go, you research, you do that. We need that. I need that. I need you to do this desperately, because I know that with the guidance we have and with your good heart, you're going to create something amazing, you know? And so I just really, really want to respond. When I was in school, oh, jeepers, internet was new. And the only publications in social work with American Indians were 100% alcoholism. It was all about, why do Indians drink? You're like, oh, buddy, really? Like, there were no other issues you could look up at any time. And so, you know, things have changed, and I think you're going to do an amazing job.
Thank you for that. So I will say that and I know I just put it in the chat, but the International Journal of Indigenous Health, it's actually run by the Indigenous Studies program from the University of Toronto. They're actually a really great resource for current Indigenous research topics. A lot of the research that is being published, I've noticed, has come from Australia, but also from Canada, because they do have a stronger because they do have more Indigenous researchers in the Canadian and New Zealand areas from what I've seen. Which kind of just brings to mind too, and you mentioned, research being done when you were in school on, alcoholism. I've started to notice research appearing on things such as first law or natural law within Indigenous knowledge. There's a researcher that I'm currently working with, Dr. Nicole Redvers, who's Deninu Kue First Nations in the Northwest Territories. And we're actually working on a research project right now on honoring spiritual laws in Indigenous knowledge pertaining to planetary health and the environment. And it's interesting because we are using my dad for that. We are listing him as an author. And one of the things that I've also kind of noticed too, within just like looking at the research that's published, especially by non-Indigenous people, is that I noticed that the non-Indigenous researcher or PI is labeled as like the first author, or they don't even acknowledge, the people that are giving them the knowledge for that research. So I think that's something kind of to take into consideration too when looking at the current research trends with Indigenous people.
Thank you, Kwana, and everyone again. And now our last question, and I did remind everyone in the chat, we are on native time, which means we're done when we're done. So, our last question, what is your deepest wish for our people and our tribes? It's a big one, Melody.
I had to take a nice deep breath on this one. So I'm going to say that this wish is really something that has happened when I began my 50s. The 50s are fabulous, by the way, everyone. Really love that. It's a great decade. And in the 50s, I came to this really interesting realization that I felt my time asserting the way I want to do things, it needs to end, that time is done. I've done everything I could. I put all my energy into it. And my deepest wish is to help younger people from our tribes develop into what they need to be. And to do that, they need a lot of tools. They need us to really reach out, to be honest with them, to show compassion, to forgive errors and mistakes, to really think expansively. They don't need us. Ooh, let me tell you, my grandparents and parents' generation, tough. Ooh, tough. Everything was wrong. I almost feel like the definition of Hopi is to be critical. It's not, but it should be. That should really be what it means to be Hopi. Sorry if there's any Hopis on here and I'm upsetting you. Just my family. And I swear everything was always wrong that you did. And that needs to end now. We need to not be this way with each other. And so my fondest, deepest wish is we can help the young generation figure out, the flaming garbage can that is right now. And I really do mean that. There is so many things happening. And being older, I've had experiences that can assist, but I really am doing my best to help bring that out, that their own knowledge can come in. And, gosh, I try. And it is hard. And, there's so much hurt in our community. And sometimes it's easier. Kelly said some magical words about lateral violence. It's easiest to strike out at those next to you. And so working with young people, sometimes they do that. Sometimes they bite back and they get angry. and to just love them through that and show that compassion and move on, keep moving, keep going, to know that the betterment of your people takes precedence over how you feel today. And so my deepest wish is for young people to bring forward new and different ways of thinking, because I do believe that this generation is really ready to implement that older knowledge. I'm Gen X, no okay boomer for me. My sister, you can okay boomer her, but I'm Gen X, and I really feel like we kind of blew it. I do. I feel like we weren't ready to implement. I think there was a lot more assimilation. I think there was a lot more comfort with the spaces we occupied when we were educated. And I think this generation is different. And I love Gen Z. They are awesome. They are challenging. They are honest. They are really looking to dig. You know, I like, Stephen, when you talked about the why, not what is, but the why, the why. The young people, they're really willing to take a deep dive into the why and come out. And I think they just need guidance, not as how to tell you, but guidance about, let me share what has been done. You know, I think they need that in order to help them find really unique ways of being. So I really, my deepest wish is for these generations to rise and to accept and love all the Indigenous parts of themselves. And for those who are mixed, love your non-Indigenous parts of yourself. You know, I think there's that. There's a huge amount of people who are from different tribes, who are from Canada, who are from Mexico, who are from all different kinds of Indigenous peoples. And we really do need to come together. I think this generation can do it. I think this generation can really provide solutions. We just need to listen and uplift them. So that is my deepest wish from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you for that, Melody. And everyone who has spoken on other questions before, Stephen and Kwana, thank you also for sharing your knowledge, experience, and wisdom. I grew up in a very traditional family in regards to culture, language, ceremony, and even how we speak to one another. And my grandfather always taught me, you never wish for things, because it's a selfish part of, you know, existing in life, and you never wish for things. You let things naturally be, because if you think, you know, in a naturalistic way with animals, they don't wish to eat, they're going to go find it, you know, kind of thing. And so I want to say I don't have a deep wish, but I do have deep hopes of change that's going to come. And that Melody talked about it earlier. And Stephen talked about it earlier too. And that was one of the things that I felt I've always had a challenge with in accepting, and also trying to implement, and also trying to educate, only because there really is no education in regards to the way things used to be compared to what's happening now. And one of the issues that I've always had is, what is sovereignty? What does that mean for our people? How is that word even a part of our culture, when we've always been a people that flowed like the seasons? And one of the things that I've really always, implemented when I'm talking with our people in all Indigenous communities is, change is always hard. Change is difficult. And we've always educated everybody on that, especially in the social work field. Change is hard. Learn how to transition. You just got to find your coping skills. No, I think one of the things when I always try to implement a lot more Indigenous thinking in regards to everything that we do is that if the seasons can change without complaint, so can you. And I'm not saying that your pain isn't a priority or that your pain isn't real. I'm just saying that you transition and you change every day, whether it's the smallest aspect in life to those big, huge decisions that you have to make. You change your clothes, you change your habits when seasons change, you change to go to bed, like just things like that are little tiny milestones in regards to change. So when it comes to what my deepest hope for change is there's a lot that kind of I had to reflect on, because when I was thinking about this, I was contradicting myself. But one thing that kept coming into mind is, though I am in support of the advocacy that's happening, that our children are doing now, that all the social injustices that they're bringing forth and they're putting it in your face, like this is what happened. They want to go, or not they want to, they're advocating for, going back to our tradition, going back to, our culture and going back to language. Being that I grew up in a more traditional family, I feel like they need to really think about what that means to them before they advocate. Because you can't pick and choose what tradition you want to abide by. You can't pick and choose what culture you want to continue to, implement, and those that you're saying, no, we're not going to do that. And for me, I do take it a little bit personal, only because tradition means it's step by step the way it's always been. It does not mean let's jump here, let's skip here, let's jump here, let's skip here. And a lot of the way tradition used to be has been misconstrued with the generations that have taught us that, and for example, Ashley had just put in the chat that the way we are critical of one another is a trauma response. And we've all come, or our generations before us have had those historical trauma events happen to them, such as the boarding school era. And the reason why we keep bringing up boarding school era to our non-Indigenous visitors here is because that was the main turn point in what changed us as the people. That is really where we've learned the negative side of mental health and mental illness, because that's kind of where that's pretty much where it grew from. Imagine being 4 years old imagine yourself being 12 and you're in a boarding school and you grew up in a village. You grew up in a community where everyone was your teacher, and where you were guided with love, you were guided with respect, and you were guided with the appropriate consequence to your action. Now be taken out of that environment and put in a box where you coughed and you got hit in the back of the head, where you spoke your language and you got whipped. Imagine being that child and just wondering, what did I do? What am I doing? Mama's not there. Dad's not there. Your grandparents, even anybody from your village, except for the other kid that was kidnapped with you. You're all asking each other, what did I do? Then you get sexually abused. What is happening to me? So imagine all of that. Just internalizing all of those emotions because you have no one to turn to. Historical intergenerational trauma stems from that. So if you can't imagine your kids being hurt, one of the things that I've always heard is, my biggest fear is that someone hurts my child when I'm not there. Imagine that being a boarding school child. And so I think when it comes back to advocating back to being traditional, a lot of the youth nowadays that are advocating for that, going back to those Indigenous frameworks, are thinking about the historical trauma, the outcome of that abuse, and how they were being taught traditionally. And that is where we need to offer that healing, so we can go back to our original Indigenous framework and our original Indigenous ceremonial step-by-step instructions, if you will, on how to live in this world. And I feel like right now, we are never going to heal if we continue to hold on to that hurt. And it's easy for me to say. It's easy for me to say, yeah, we just need to let go. But we need to learn how to heal ourselves, to heal our people. Because if we're not healed and then we're not coming from a place of healing, then we cannot offer that healing to the community. And we cannot expect our community to heal and let go because we're holding on to something. And I think when it came to me, that was the healing I needed to do for myself in the education perspective of me going to school. And that was a lot of self-reflection that I had to do, you know, and being a part of the Honor Collective has really, really helped put a lot of that perspective and a lot of that self-reflection in place, because I had to continue to ask myself, why am I being so resistant to some of the things that are being brought to my attention, or some of the things that are happening, or some, you know, whatever it is that's a barrier to me to continue to grow. And I had to self-reflect on where my healing needed to start. And to heal is to admit, everyone thinks that if you heal, you have to admit wrong. And it has nothing to do with being wrong, it has nothing to do with being right. It has everything to do with what hurt you in that moment that is continuing to keep you from moving forward. And I wanted to kind of bring forward about how that interferes with forgiveness, because everyone feels like that you have to forgive to heal yourself. And I want to say, I don't believe that. I don't believe that you have to forgive someone just so you can heal yourself, because you're continuing to give the other person power, because you're letting them decide that right now, I think I'm going to heal from you. And I don't think that we should be putting that on ourselves. And I don't think we should be putting that on other people. And this is from a perspective of the way I was taught. And this is from a perspective of how my grassroots experience has brought forth to me to observe, especially within our community. I think whoever is ready to forgive someone, like being in part of an Indigenous community, we're not ready to forgive the government. We're not ready to forgive those religious entities because they hurt us so much. I'm not saying that we're holding on to it to have a grudge, but I'm saying that that hurt is so internalized that it has affected our generation and our offsprings moving forward, that we're continuing that trauma, but it's not a trauma that we can just say, okay, I'm healed. You know, healing comes in very different ways. Some people are spiritual, some people are traditional, some people are religious. But I feel like whatever entity we have to help us go forward within ourselves is the only way we can continue to have the change happen within our community. And I feel like right now we are still in the age of healing. I think right now the kids are now understanding all of what intergenerational trauma and historical trauma is and how effective it is with what's going on nowadays. And I agree with Melody. I think they're okay. I think it's okay now for them to express that they are angry, because the generations before that could not say that they were angry. They could not say that they were sad, because they were punished for feeling angry or being sad. And then when they were released to go home, their parents are like, he's angry, she's sad. You know, alcoholism kind of took place. There's just like so much of the snowball cycle that's happened that affected our community, that we need to have our kids now express that emotion, and going back to the Indigenous framework, redirect them and guide them to how appropriately say, it's okay to feel angry and it's okay to be upset. How else can I help you? You know, and I think everyone takes that power away. And as social workers, you know, we have that education to say, I know what you're going through. This is what you need to do. And that's not what we should be doing. We should be guiding them to create their own plan and how they can heal themselves. And so And I agree that, you know, when Melody had mentioned earlier, social workers, what really did what we, you know, as the profession of social work, how that effective, how we are now. I think we are now in a place to reverse that and to offer that healing back to the community and say, hey, in our Indigenous perspective and community and grassroots, this is how we can do it. Kwana is going to be doing research. He's going to create and he's going to make better theories and better frameworks and better structures and better organization to say this theory never worked, but this one's going to be effective. And I bless that on you, Kwana. And I know you're going to do great with that. And I love your words, Stephen, in regards to the experiences you've had and the wisdom you've gone through. And I think with your knowledge, you're definitely going to lead the people into more healing, especially when it comes to the children. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing in regards to that and recognizing. And for Melody, honestly, the scholar, the research, the knowledge, and the patience is really going to help with the youth. I feel like that guidance is really going to push forward. And once the children learn how to heal and learn how to teach the community to heal, we're definitely going to rise up and we're definitely going to stick. We're definitely going to rise up and we're going to move forward and we're going to take back our identities. And I want to say that again. We are going to take back our identities. We're no longer going to be a census number. We're no longer going to be labeled a certain tribe because federally that's what we're being told. We're going to go back to our kinship. We're going to go back to our clans and we're going to go back to being healers of one another. And we're going to heal Mother Earth and we're going to be great. Sorry, I just did it out. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly. And I'm going to just repeat for Stephen and Kwana. And I'm actually going to ask Stephen to go first because Kwana, after you answer the question, I want you to talk about our special interest group that we're starting. And Amelia is going to put the information in the chat because this was the whole purpose of tonight, was to keep the work going. So Stephen, what is your deepest wish for our people and our tribes?
Wow, no pressure, right? No, I think Melody and Kelly really summed it up. There's not a whole lot I can really say. I mean, they really captured it, and that's why we have such deep respect for our matriarch system, and our beliefs, our traditions, because you know our Native women are so wise, and they have a deeper, I feel, understanding that many of us, speaking for myself, as you know, we sometimes struggle to put into words. But you know, I just want to say I believe this has been a cathartic moment for everybody. I mean, it's not just for us; it's for everybody that's in the chat to be able to discuss it. And you know, if you came here to learn, I mean, that's good. I mean, but if you're a Native that or non-Native that's struggling with identity, you know, I think this is a great place to be and to talk about who you are and discover what you are and decide for yourself how you want to be identified as you move forward in this world. You know, there's so much that came up. I know I talked about boarding schools, and I know I talked about, you know, the oppression of American Indians. And, you know, there's a lot of things that were going on in terms of education, you know, with American Indians. And I will say this, that I really feel that, you know, education is probably the equalizer for equity. We really, Native Americans are underrepresented or overrepresented, I should say, in terms of dropout rates, not going to college, low, you know, very low rates in terms of finishing college or finishing high school. And I really want to turn that around. I really want to see that turned around because we need Kwanas, and we need Kellys, and we need Melodies, and we need everybody that's in the chat and everybody that's out there in Indian country to break that cycle, break that chain of trauma as much as we possibly can. Now, one thing I will say about trauma is that trauma doesn't go away. Once trauma happens, it's there. And the thing that is the onus on us as elders is that, you know, as you go back in time, the closer you are to that horrific trauma. But you are still the recipient of that trauma as it's passed down. And, you know, and so you find yourself oppressing trauma a lot as Indian people. And it's something that you live with. It's something that you deal with. It's something that you, you know, are constantly reminded of in history books, within your tribe, within your family. And, you know, it's important to understand when you're triggered by that trauma. That is so important to understand and to know, because, you know, many Indian people are reacting to something, but they think they're in control, but they're not. They're being triggered by trauma, and they could be triggered by historical trauma of some kind. I will say that when I worked with American Indian and Alaska Native children for child parent psychotherapy and PCIT, that most of the work had to be done with the families, not the children so much. It's the families that had been traumatized. It's what we call ghosts in the nursery, where these children or these adults with children were victims of trauma themselves. And we, you know, I realized that, you know, even with some of the things that they had done or their behaviors or actions, you know, I always tried to get them to, remove that. When you remove that, they're beautiful people with beautiful spirits, but they've been traumatized and nobody has ever helped them because there was no help for them, or there was no help given to them. And so this is what's so great about this new generation coming up. They're being educated. They're beginning to understand. They're beginning to be educated in ways that we were never educated. They're beginning to have opportunities. They're beginning to be able, this seventh generation we talk about, they're beginning to redefine, you know, who we are. And that's a beautiful thing. And I hope that even if affirmative action goes away, it's my deepest hope that we can continue that education, because we do walk in two worlds. Culture is not static. Culture is ever evolving. And we have an opportunity for the first time in 500 years to begin that beautiful journey of defining who we are again and what we stand for. And I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for everything that each and every single one of you have said. I guess I'm speaking from a perspective of somebody who is younger. I guess my deepest wish for my tribe and for my people would be to let them know that we are still here, that my generation still, that we are still Indigenous people, that I am still Lakota, that we are still here to carry on the ceremonies, the teachings, the traditions of our people. And I think that with the way that we are being educated, we do have a better platform for advocacy. We do have a better platform for bringing up issues within Indian country. I also, my advice too is also that that we don't forget the teachings of our elders, that we don't, criticize them, that we don't speak against them, that we don't disrespect them, because I've seen that a lot, especially with people my age that are speaking with their elders and even their parents too, and passing on knowledge. And I guess right now, so my dad gave me a teaching there were 4 different components to how we see the healing process, or at least how he told me he sees the healing process. One of them was igluwashtepi, or the concept of making amends. The next one is oyate wotaku e gagapi, making of relatives. Oyate chalawashtepi, a resolution of peace and acceptance by multiple parties. And then Wuyuha Wijakupi, and then which is like gifts as like part of restitution. I guess is like the best way to say it in English. But you know, we have all these stories of the boarding school, we have all these stories of the trauma, and they're hard to listen to, especially since I do have a personal connection with those, with my dad. But I think my biggest thing for our people is that we have those stories won't go away. We're still learning from those stories. And I think that with this new generation, with my generation in collaboration with the older ones and with the next one, we can really bring change to the way that to the way that we're seen globally as Indigenous people.
Thank you, Kwana. And you brought the wisdom there with your answer, and brought your elders in with that answer. Now I'm putting in the chat, our whole point for doing this tonight is that Kwana completed a proposal to have an Indigenous special interest group at NASW New York State, and this was our kickoff. So that begins next week on November 9th at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. And I just put the link in the chat. And I know when I've talked to Melody, Kelly, Stephen, and Kwana, is the hope that our Native loved ones who are here tonight will be joining us in this special interest group, because that's where the work really begins of how can we all work together. And I just want to give my sincerest Wado thank you to Melody, Kelly, Stephen, and Kwana. It's such an honor to know you. It is such an honor to work with you. And I want to thank you for all of the vulnerability you brought tonight, all of the truth you spoke. And I truly hope that this has been a healing space for each and every one of you, as well as the other people who are with us tonight. But most importantly, I hope it's healing for you. And I know it's been healing for me. And you've said things that I'm like, oh, that's why I think that, or that's why I do that. So I really appreciate everything you've done. And we will be seeing each other very soon. Take care of yourselves tonight. Hug all those babies, hug anyone you can, and get your love tonight. And again, Wado to you for everything you've done. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.